Now, earlier today, they had this big press conference with all of the various politicians and officials of Boston getting up there and talking about what's going on and congratulating each other for their heroic response to this horrible terror act. And, of course, Obama got up there as well. And basically, they all said an infinite deal about absolutely nothing. There was very little hard information, and some of which is just outright lies. The latest spin we're getting from Boston is there were no unexploded bombs. There were only the 2 bombs used near the finish line of the Boston Marathon. Well, what about the one at the JFK Library? We saw the photos of the burn, the fire damage at the door. That was supposed to have been caused by a bomb. They have no leads. Right now, they've got nothing. And the entire press conference was about how they're activating all these agencies and all these emergency programs and then just calling out for tips. If you saw something, call and tell us. They don't really have a clue. Now, the only other hard piece of information to come out so far this morning is the nature of the bombs themselves. They were apparently inside pressure cookers. Somebody took some gunpowder, surrounded it with bits of metal. There were some ball bearings, nails with the heads removed, just general junk metal, and they put it together. They're now saying it was a timer, so there was no reason to shut off the cell phone system yesterday, and they had these pressure cooker bombs. So it's time to ban pressure cookers. We've got to stop this senseless killing. We need a 15-day waiting period for all cookware purchases. And we should allow no pressure cookers larger than a 1-quart size. And people on prescription antidepressants will have to be confined to cooking their dinners in the microwave oven only. So, let me see if I have this right. There's a greater than usual security presence at the Boston Marathon. People are commenting on it. The bomb squad is there with their dogs, and nobody, not Department of Homeland Security, not the Boston Police Department, not the FBI, nobody wonders why somebody's walking up and down the sidewalks with a pressure cooker. Maybe they thought it was just a large mariachi to make noise as the runners came by. But one thing that's probably going to come out of this is a push for taggants in gunpowder, which of course will mean registration of all bulk gunpowder purchases. That's one of the things they're probably going to be pushing for right now. A lot of people opposed to taggants in gunpowder because it impacts the smooth burning of the propellant, and of course those little tiny glass chips rapidly erode the interior of your gun barrel. But everybody's with an agenda to push is trying to use this for whatever their agenda happens to be. Now, interestingly enough, during one of the press conferences yesterday, where the Massachusetts governor was up there talking about this, one of the reporters in the audience asks if this marathon attack was a false flag staged to take away our civil liberties, promote homeland security, and the governor says no. Next question. Now, it sounds like a reasonable question to me, but let me ask you this, Mr. Governor. If you don't know who did it, how do you know it's not a false flag? Methinks the governor of Massachusetts doth protest way too much. So we're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back with more about the Boston bombing after these words from our sponsors. I want to go back to yesterday when they were reporting they had a suspect at the Boston hospital, a Saudi man who was under guard. And then there was another photograph circulating of somebody who was actually on the ground in handcuffs. Those have gone away. Later in the day, the Boston Police Department issued a statement. They didn't have any suspects. And the story about the Saudi man illustrates how effective the Muslim bashing propaganda has been, because the only reason he was in the hospital and the police were looking after him was that he, like so many other people, was running away from the scene of the bombing. Somebody saw him and said, "Oh my goodness, it's a Saudi," and tackled him, knocked him onto the ground. And so they basically said he's got nothing to do with it, he's cooperating with the police and FBI, and he's no longer officially a suspect. The FBI has taken control of the investigation into the Boston bombings. They're up there posing and preening, and they're getting their camera time in the corporate media. And again, they're out there promising that there'll be justice, there'll be retribution, there'll be revenge. And they're following all these leads that are coming in, most of which, or so far all of which, are going nowhere. They've raided a couple of apartments. Turned out there was nothing there. They were looking for this Penske rental truck. That has panned out. They're just thrashing around here. And the big question, of course, remains on the presumption that this is a false flag attack. Who are they going to blame? And they're throwing the blame everywhere. Everybody's trying to use this to demonize whatever their target group is. Remember what Rahm Emanuel, former White House Chief of Staff, was saying is you never let a serious crisis go to waste. And what I mean by that, it's an opportunity to do things you could not do before. Obviously, everybody's taking Rahm Emanuel's advice to heart. How can I use this to push whatever my particular agenda is? They're going to exploit this crisis. That's the reason for this constant coverage to the exclusion of everything else. The only other non-bombing news I've seen on CNN so far today is to tell everybody that, hey, the stock market's back up and you're making money. Throw your money into the stock market. It'll be good for the country. So they were announcing that they were looking for a suspect who was a Saudi national on a student visa. Well, if they didn't know who he was, how did they know he was on a student visa? And so they're just throwing all of this stuff out there on who you should blame. And it's not just Saudis and Arab Muslims. And by the way, I got a lot of harassing and obscene emails saying, of course it was Arab Muslims. Of course it was the Muslims. Who else would do such a thing? Well, I have an easy answer for that one. CIA and Mossad, false flag attack. That's why that reporter was asking the governor that question. It's a reasonable question in this day and age. Is this another false flag attack to justify greater government control, surveillance, investigations, violation of the Bill of Rights? Of course it is. Apparently, the corporate media is out there, and let's see, the list of potential suspects is rapidly stretching to the entire country. Right-wing Christian conservatives are being blamed for this. A lot of, it's all the right-wingers. It's those right-wingers, those GOP, whatnot. Chris Matthews is out there saying it's likely tax protesters who are behind this bombing, those evil people who just don't think they should be paying taxes just because it's unconstitutional. So they're blaming the tax protesters. And Eric Rush, who is associated with Fox News, on his Twitter account was out there saying that kill all the Muslims in the response to the Boston Marathon attack. Just presume they're all collectively guilty and start killing them. It's provoked a huge backlash against him. But everybody's using this to push their agenda. Now, there are some false flags, false trails, distractions. Apparently, one of the photos of the immediate aftermath of the bombing shows an individual up on the roof of one of the buildings overlooking the marathon route. And they're saying, who was he? Was he the perpetrator? Was he watching his handiwork from above? And if you look very carefully, from his particular location, he can't actually see either of the bombs. So I'm ready to rule him out as a perpetrator. Now, having been born in Boston myself and spent a great deal of time in that city, people go up on their roofs to get cool in the summer when it gets really humid, and it would make sense that anybody who's living or has an office in that building would go up to the top and look over to watch the marathon. It's a much less crowded venue, so I don't think that that's a particularly valid line of inquiry. So who is the enemy? Who's the villain? Why have they, remember 9/11, as soon as 9/11 was over, it's Osama bin Laden. It had to be Osama bin Laden. They had the villain already picked out. This time they don't. Obama's up there saying, well, we don't know. We don't know if it was foreign. We don't know if it was domestic. They're hitting that domestic angle pretty hard. But, the United States government has made so many enemies. 300 million Americans, 7 billion people around the world are all potential suspects in this thing. And maybe one possibility, if it's a false flag attack, they're not going to come up with a suspect or somebody they've arrested. And they'll say, demonize this person. The longer they go without having an actual suspect to arrest in this bombing, the more justification they have for aggressive investigation into the Occupy movement, patriot groups, anybody espousing violence, tax protesters, those pesky constitutionalists who want the government to play by the rule. This could be the beginning of a huge crackdown on dissent in this country. under the guise of investigating the Boston bombing. We know that they're already trying to use the Boston bombing to ram the CISPA Act through Congress to tie together all these huge databases they're building on Americans, all of which failed to detect this bombing was going to happen. One little comment I noticed, looking at the overhead view of one of the bombing sites, remember all those large picture window storefronts along that sidewalk? There's one picture window where the glass from that window is blown out into the street, not in, which raises the possibility that the bomb was actually inside that storefront, could have been put there yesterday, Sunday, which means all this Boston police call for people to send in their photos and their videos from their cell phones and everything is a completely pointless waste of time. So everybody's out there short-stroking this thing, and already the corporate media is out there saying we have to be ready to give up more of our rights and civil protections in exchange for safety and security. They're out there pushing that whole thing. See, we've got to do more of what we're doing. Peter King is already out there saying, obviously with the Boston bombing, we can't cut funding for Homeland Security or our police department. So, hey, there's a motive right there. Maybe the Department of Homeland Security set off this bomb. They're in the middle of building a $3.9 billion headquarters. They've been spending money with wild, reckless abandon on ammunition and explosives. They got to be running out of cash right now. They've got a good motive right there. But everybody's screaming, we need more security. We've got to grope your crotches at the bus stations and the train depots and all the rest of it. Now, at this point in the Boston bombing story, there are really only two possibilities. The first possibility, and the most likely one in my mind, is this was a false flag attack staged by either the U.S. government or Israel or both to serve an as yet undisclosed political agenda, or it was a genuine act of terror. And if it was a genuine act of terror, what it tells us is that the Department of Homeland Security, the Transportation Safety Administration, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Central Intelligence Agency, the fusion centers are all a complete waste of taxpayer money. All these databases, all the warrantless scanning of our emails, social media, listening to our phone calls, all the crotch-grabbing surveillance cameras, microphones, GPS tracking, naked scanners were totally and completely useless. Even the bomb-sniffing dogs on site in Boston, supposedly for a training drill, failed to sniff the bombs. From top to bottom, the entire security industrial complex laid a big, fat egg on this one. They failed, they failed, they failed. Simply, completely, and utterly. And therefore, there is no more justification for the people of the United States to put up with this erosion of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. Simply on the basis of complete epic fail and incompetence, all of these agencies ought to be shut down. And let's spend the money on improving our roads, schools, and hospitals. This security industrial complex is a complete failure. The Boston bombing proves it. We were told we had to put up with naked scanners and listening to our phone calls and reading our emails in order to prevent terrorism. Well, guess what? It didn't work. And doing more of it is not going to help the situation. It's time to rethink the terror threat. You want to end terrorism? I know how to end terrorism overnight. Stop messing around with other people's countries. That's how you stop terrorism. Homeland Security is a huge, gigantic waste of money. Homeland Security spent money on things like seminars, on, like, did Jesus die for Klingons too? Trainings for the zombie apocalypse. It's just a huge cash cow for all those people inside DHS to live high on the taxpayer hog and travel the world for all these conferences and seminars and just live the life of luxury at the expense of the American people. And the one thing they were supposed to do, prevent an act of terror, they failed to do. They're a complete failure. We'll be right back.